and welcome to the Good Leader Podcast. I'm Will van der Hart, and this series on stress traps is about how we can do things better to save ourselves from significant amounts of stress in the long haul. And today we're going to be talking a bit about loneliness. I'm delighted that we've got Rev Rachel Bedford here with us. Welcome to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Will, for having me.
It's great to have you here, and we've had a lot of conversations. You've just joined the team at Revitalise Trust. It's been great to chat to you. And one of the areas we were talking about was around the idea of loneliness and leadership and what a impact that has on leaders in both church and charity. Do you want to say a bit more about what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jesus modelled to us, didn't he, how to do ministry, which is surrounded by people. He had his 12 that he journeyed with, but then also had his other friends that we know that he spent time with. And that wasn't irregular, that was regular. And so I think for us, that's the model that we need to follow. Like, who are the people that we see week in, week out, but then who are the other people that we plan to see in order that we're not isolated in our leadership?
I hear, having been a leader for a while and looking after other leaders, some suggestions which I think are quite unhelpful. One is that you can't be friends with anyone in your own congregation. I hear that quite a lot. I hear the words like leaders are set apart, and so they need to be kind of on their own. Neither of those ideas are particularly useful. What do you think?
I completely agree. I think it's possible to be friends with people in your congregation. You have to think that through and think about what sort of boundaries you're going to have around those relationships. But I do think it's possible. And also I think it's important in order that as leaders we're not sort of elevated into this separate space, that we can't actually do real friendship and community with people close to us. I sometimes hear the phrase, leadership is lonely, as if it's just something we have to accept. But if that's the case, I think it's something that we need to fix and make sure it isn't.
You were leading, senior leader in Twickenham for some time, and you're an ordained leader in the Church of England. What did you learn in your own leadership within a church community around building friendships?
One of the things I learned is that I think when you're in that position of senior leadership, people are keen to spend time with you, and so quite often I'd find in a sense it's a wonderful problem to have, but have lots of invitations from people within the congregation to go for dinner or go for coffee or spend time with. And I think sometimes my diary was kind of driven by the invitations rather than me actually having a plan as to who I was going to spend my time with. And so I think trying to take a step back and not let the invitations dictate my time, but actually decide, okay, well, how much time do I want to give to spending with people in my congregation, and how much time do I want to make sure I'm spending with people outside of my congregation, my immediate community. And it's obviously a bit blurry, isn't it? Because there'll be people who live close to you, friendships that you've maybe picked up at the school gate or at the gym or wherever, who are not in your congregation. But again, what's local and then what's further afield, and how do I make sure that that's planned into my diary?
So there's something qualitative about our engagement with friends. Yeah. My experience, I think, was often feeling like optimistically that I was just about to become friends with someone because they've invited me around for dinner, but then having them say, oh, and we're actually having marital problems right now, would you mind telling us, giving us some advice, and realising that some of the things that I assumed were friendship were actually professional. But equally, the danger of that is that you assume that every welcome, every invitation is somehow got an ask behind it. Yeah. How do we navigate that kind of landscape?
I don't know about you, Will, but I sort of have a sense in which I know when I've worked, and so I'd often ask myself this question, like, did what I just did feel like work? And if it feels like work, it is work, and therefore I need to make sure I rest. And I think I would often apply that to these sorts of conversations. Like, you don't want to frame every gathering with a sort of like, what sort of conversation is this? Is it a fun one, or are we going to talk about your marriage? But at the same time, at the end of, say, an evening or a lunch with someone, you can ask yourself that question, well, actually, gosh, that felt a bit heavier than I thought it was going to be. That really did feel like work. So I need to make sure that I've got some other stuff in my day or in my week that's not that. Or actually, if it felt really fun, you might leave thinking, well, I feel quite full from that, so I'll just crack on.
That's a really good way of distinguishing it. Did it feel like work or did it feel like fun? I think the danger is we set hard rules and say, oh, well, every encounter I have in the parish is going to feel like work, therefore I can't have any life-giving relationships with anyone in the parish. Yeah. I found I've been really blessed and I've really benefited from historic relationships from before I was a priest, because those friends just think I'm just a regular Joe, which is great because I am. They want to just treat me just as I am without any expectation. Have you benefited from historic relationships from before you were ordained?
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the ones that you have to work hard at to maintain and to keep up. Those people know you from a completely different space, where you don't have that sort of reverend in front of your name. And it's important because those are the people that know all the stupid stuff that, I've in my past, that bring back the funny stories and the nostalgic memories. And it's important to connect with that, I think.
That worries me in leadership, is that I see people wanting to move away from their past friendship groups because sometimes they make them feel unworthy. And my friends are quite good at making me feel unworthy. But I know they love me, but there's that danger. There's a bit of a clash of worlds. We've obviously got younger planters going out. What advice would you give them about staying connected to those historic relationships?
I think there can be a danger, particularly in senior leadership, that frankly we just sort of take ourselves a little bit too seriously. And I think it's those people from our past that are more likely to bring us down to reality, which is what you're talking about. Now, obviously, there might be relationships and friendships in the past that are actually actively unhelpful because they connect us with, I don't know, former habits or things that we used to be involved in that we'd rather not be. So there's a discernment that's needed there. But actually, people that just keep you level-headed, I think that's essential. Yeah,
that's really great advice. I'm very conscious that obviously you're married, your husband's a head teacher, and a couple of boys. I'm married, my wife is a school chaplain. We've both enjoyed a kind of micro community within our leadership. But thinking specifically about leaders who might be single, what I noticed was, although my wife might not remember it, there were moments when people said, you should go off and spend time together, or you should go and have a holiday together. One thing I hear from some of our single leaders is that there's an assumption that, you haven't really got anything else, so you should just crack on with your work. What advice would you give specifically to single leaders around how they protect their relationships and how they avoid the danger of loneliness in leadership, which is a really very significant thing for both married and unmarried leaders?
Yeah, I'm always really keen to push back at any sort of normative model of senior leadership. There are lots of people doing it in lots of different ways. You've got, married couples leading together, or you've got, folk like you or I who are ordained, but actually are partners doing ministry or not doing ministry in a completely different space. And then you've got people who are single and who are leading in that way. And I think we've just got to get better at saying there's not one way. And I would encourage single people or people like myself who are sort of leading as an ordained person, but not with my spouse next to me, to be able to sort of push back at some of those norms which just creep into culture and say, well, actually, this is the model that I lead in, and my family shape looks like this, and the sort of downtime or the relationships that I need to sustain myself look like this. Yeah. So just strong encouragement to people to just say what works for them.
Do what's good for them. Yeah. And in terms of breaking down loneliness, if we get caught in that space of feeling disconnected and feeling lonely, it's a hard place to be, isn't it? Because it's partly hard about acknowledging. I think that's part of it is acknowledging that that's actually where I am. What would you pastorally suggest as good steps to take for maybe a planting leader who's a couple of years in and is starting to feel very much more isolated than they'd expected?
I think my advice for a leader in that situation is to just acknowledge actually what might be happening. So I'm happy to speak about, personal experience whereby a very close friendship of mine, for circumstances outside of my control, sort of fell apart over the last couple of years. And I was quite hurt by that. It's quite difficult to process. But I think initially I just thought, I'm fine, I'll just crack on, I've got lots of other friends and I'll just keep busy. But actually, I needed to listen to the fact that loss of that friendship was making me feel a bit lonely, and I needed to do something about it and seek some other friendships or invest in other friendships. I think sometimes it's we can get ourselves into a circumstance where we're lonely, feeling isolated, and we sort of wonder, well, how did I really get here? Oh, I'll just keep being busy. Yeah. But actually admitting, how did I get here? Actually, that's a bit difficult, and I need to take some action to remedy that. Yeah. Because those relationships and friendships are the things that are going to help us keep perspective in ministry, keep our resilience over the long haul. It's not just a thing that you can ignore and hope it will go away, or at least that would be my experience.
That's really helpful. I mean, I absolutely agree. It's certainly, it's not a bolt-on. You can't say, well, relationships are kind of nice to have. They're a need to have. But also I've noticed that loneliness is often a precursor to lots of other unhelpful behaviours which can neutralise loneliness. So falling into the traps of addiction, pornography, alcoholism, workaholism, and all those things that kind of come out to try and fill the space. So if we're going to combat those things, the issue of loneliness and particularly accountability is so important that we kind of keep pressing into the place of needing to be in open and accountable relationships with others. When it comes to kind of stepping into deeper community, obviously we've talked about the fact that you can have good relationships in the church that you're leading in. You can obviously lean back on historic relationships, but there's also a great network of other people in a similar situation. Have you found benefit from connecting with other church leaders in different contexts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, even last night I ended up having a phone conversation with a friend who's leading in a different context. And I went into that phone call sort of feeling a bit grumpy and whingy about my own context. And I listened to her circumstance. I thought, oh gosh, she's facing way bigger challenges than me. And I wouldn't wish that on her, but it helped my perspective. And I went to bed thinking, oh, come on, Rachel, get a bit of perspective on your own situation. I think that's really helpful. I think also there can be, over the long haul in senior leadership, a sense in which you just sort of lose your creativity and edge. And actually when you're connecting with people in a different geographical area, different diocese, different context, just keeps you fresh. I think we just desperately need that constant creativity in our leadership. Just to mention something on accountability as well, I think something a trap that I have fallen into a little bit is to think that, when we're discipling younger leaders, we sort of go heavy on, you must make sure that you have people that you're accountable to. And we sort of think ourselves, perhaps who've been Christians for longer, don't need that. But actually, I'd say the opposite is true. We might think that we're mature Christians, but we probably need the accountability more than ever, or at least I have had to actively seek that the longer I've been in ministry. That
is so important. I absolutely agree. I mean, I see that across the board, that actually the more experience we get, the more accountable we need to be, because the more autonomy we can enjoy. Yeah. But that accountability is easiest in loving relationship. That actually, having a fraternity, a group of friends that you're like, hey, how's it going with that area? Or how's that going with that struggle? That open accountability when you know that you're safe is a key part of what keeps you in a good space and also keeps you away from loneliness. I don't know about you, but I found shared activity a really great way of fostering relationship. So I know I go on about it too much, but I really like fly fishing. Yeah. It's it couldn't be more stereotypical for a clergy person, could it? I like fly fishing. I've actually liked it for a lifetime because my dad was into it. But I go fishing with two guys, Dan and Matt, and they're both Christian guys. And we have a day, we book a day fishing, we go out together, we're all from different places, and that time of shared activity together alongside is often the most life-giving, both in terms of friendship, because we have really great conversations, fun, because we sometimes catch fish, but also accountability, because we actually hold each other to account on relationships, how is your marriage specifically, and friendships, and also between us also parenting, and it's a really honest space. Do you have any activities that you do or that you engage with others that you find life-giving?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have several sort of family friends that we might just get outside with, go for a walk with. That's an obvious point, but actually if you don't put it in the diary, it doesn't happen. Yeah. I have another friend that I'd go to the theatre with regularly, and that's really fun. But also I think in the questions around accountability, there's sort of accountability and accountability, isn't there? Yeah. And I often have this one friend who we have a bit of an agreement with one another where we ask each other generally, how are you doing? And then I give her full permission to ask me about specific things. So, patterns of behaviour that I know that I fall into when I'm tired or stressed. Yeah. And I really value her, and obviously a very safe space to be saying to me, on that particular habit, Rachel, that you've got, how's it going? It's very specific, but that's at my invitation. And I found that hugely helpful.
That is really, really helpful. Permission giving to specific questions. Again, we've used the word safe a number of times, and I think that probably just reflects what it looks like to be in a friendship where you really trust someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that friendship, that sort of the necessity of it is, if you like, even more apparent when you think about some of the really sad stories of leadership that we've encountered over the last few years. You often see loneliness, a lack of accountability, and a lack of transparency all sort of merged together, because actually there's no one holding anyone to account, because there's no allowance. What final thing you'd say to a church planter who's feeling lonely?
Oh gosh, I would say ask yourself the question, like, when was the last time you had fun? I mean, you talked about fishing. I'm not sure that would be my idea of fun, but you know, each asking ourselves a question, and actually, if you hesitate in your answer to that question, that in itself is a problem.
Right.
We've just got to seek that out and find the people who are going to be the sources of fun. Sometimes I talk about people in my life as being either a radiator or a drain, and I want to make sure that I spend enough time with a radiator, someone I want to draw closer to. That's a fun relationship, because I know that, you know, there's always plenty of drains also in my life.
I'm going to be asking myself now, am I a radiator or a drain?
Definitely a radiator, but it's all right.
Okay. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this session of the Good Leader podcast, looking specifically at the sort of stress trap of loneliness. And we hope that this is obviously a first conversation, and what is a very sensitive topic. And whilst we might talk with great humour about it, it is painful for many people, and an area which we know is a struggle. And we'd love everyone to be in deep and life-giving friendships, but that is a real journey in itself. And we prayerfully encourage you to engage with this material and find a way in which you might seek to be alongside a great radiator. Most importantly, to know that you're not alone in this, and that the networks itself that we're part of, and also the churches that we belong to, and the relationships that we keep are precious, and that Jesus is alongside each and every one of us. So we pray you have a really blessed day. Thanks for being with us today on the Good Leader podcast.